address. And our interest for you is to develop and deliver a budget that you can adopt and will adopt on June 12th. Okay? So any questions about what we're going to be doing? Then let's do it. So the first item we want to do is talk about review of equity investments. And I've provided you with a summary of my recommendations. And this summary is entitled Reducing Disparities Through Equitable Investment. And I want to thank the Commission for the discussion about priorities that occurred back in December and carried through all of our budget discussions. And then just the thoughtful way with which we have dealt with this topic as we've moved forward. And so the discussion during your budget review has underscored the need to invest for equity now so that we can reduce disparities in the third ward and to invest more at a significant rate. So in order to invest more, we need to find sources for that investment within the current fiscal plan recommendation. And so we have looked through the fiscal plan and have come up with three ideas, two of which make additional funds available, and one of which is a future-oriented recommendation. So the first recommendation is to adjust interfund transfers. So we had planned for a transfer to go from the transformation fund to the capital reserve fund that would fund projects in that area. And we think now that there's a better idea, and so we want to adjust that, and I'll get to that idea in just a little bit. The second item would be to focus on stable investments in future years. And on May 29th, we talked about adding a provision to the budget resolution that would direct staff to do that, to make sure that we're, just like we did in this year's budget with the equity exercise, using the racial equity lens for services, do the same thing for capital projects in years going forward. And so asking us to design and implement a process to identify and recommend ongoing equitable investments in conjunction with both public and private investment. And that would be included in the budget resolution. And we also have recommended language that I'll talk about later that actually expands that just a little bit. So then finally, we could consider canceling, adjusting, or reducing projects in the FY 2019 budget. And we do have certain ideas for how to do that and move forward. So what equitable investments would we do? What would I recommend? So on May 29th, we made some recommendations to you that included these three items. One was to allocate $800,000 to the redevelopment of MLK Lodge by linking it with the sale of bonds that we plan to do for the Division Fire Station, and that would serve as seed capital for what I believe would be a larger project that would be supported by planning and pre-construction services done in the current fiscal year. So there are private parties that have long wished to redevelop MLK Lodge and use it for a variety of important programs, and we think this is a way to assist in that effort and also to assist in fundraising for that effort. So that was one recommendation. Another recommendation is to increase general fund support for the Southtown SID, and what we're recommending is $100,000 of general fund investment per year for 2 years. So that would be in fiscal year 2019 and 2020 for Southtown SID operational support. And that would give the Southtown SID the ability to consider a variety of additional investments using their tax increment and still provide for their operational activities. Then the third recommendation was a 1 year, $100,000 investment in fiscal 2019 for additional capital improvement fund support for Southtown SID capital investments. And this is recommended to go along with projects that are happening within the area that might be Vital Streets projects or other projects, and would be a way to expand results and outcomes for those projects. So following the discussion on the 29th, we've had additional time to consider how to make additional investment resources available. And what I'd like to recommend is this, and that is capitalizing a flexible third ward investment initiative within the transformation fund in fiscal year 2019. So as I mentioned earlier, we had planned to transfer essentially the remaining balance of the after all projects out of the transformation fund of about $1.3 million. And that was intended to go to the capital reserve fund to support investments there. What I'd like to recommend now is to reduce that transfer to about $572,000, still to support capital reserve fund investments, and leave about $750,000 in the transformation fund to make the initial investment in the Third Ward Equitable Investment Initiative. So investments made through the Third Ward Equitable Investment Initiative would go through a review process that would be wouldn't exactly replicate, but would use some of the principles that were involved in the transformation fund before, in terms of how investments were evaluated, and we would have to develop and approve that together. But there would be some framework for those investments. And potential investments I'm envisioning could help develop projects for future investment, so do pre-development work for significant projects. They could leverage other capital investment or support initiatives like lead remediation or awareness programs, investments that help move key objectives forward that help reduce disparities in the Third Ward. So I think that your discussion, which I really appreciate and want to honor with this recommendation, is to increase the amount that we're investing in equitable investments significantly. And this is a start that would be a great start this year, and then would set a framework for future years. So in order to do that, we have to accomplish a few things. In the capital plan, we had toyed with the idea of, or thought about the idea, maybe not toyed's a bad word. We carefully considered the idea of investing, paying for the Dunnigan water main in cash rather than paying for it over 4 years, which would mean that we'd have to find $375,000 in the current year, about that, in order to do that. Instead, we'll go back to our initial plan, which is to pay for that water main over 4 years. We do incur some interest expense, but the majority of the private partners out there are paying for it over 4 years anyway, so our payments would be lined up with theirs. So that frees up a little capital in the capital reserve fund. The Division Fire Station project requires the acquisition of property, and we had budgeted cash to pay for that, $585,000. And those expenses are eligible for bond reimbursement. And so what we're recommending now is adding that to the bond issue for construction rather than use cash. So we would still plan acquisition for during the FY 2019.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry,
No, when he's done.
Okay, when you're done, Commissioner Allen has a question.
Okay, thank you. So we would still plan for acquisition in this year, and we would be financed using resources that we have in our general fund balance, which would then be reimbursed we'll have a interdepartmental agreement, and we'll be reimbursed with interest once we sell bonds for the larger fire station construction project. And $50,000 would remain in 2019 for the process of getting ready for the acquisition of that property. So then, as we mentioned before, we would reduce the transfer from the transformation fund to the capital reserve fund by $750,000 to accumulate resources in the transformation fund for equitable investments. So recommendations 1 through 4 that are on the prior page can be implemented now through the adoption of the budget, and it is recommended that we proceed with those actions on June 12th. The matter regarding ongoing investment, I would like to address with the language that you see on number 3 there, in quotes and underlined. So what we've done with the language is make it clear that we're having a process to recommend ongoing equitable investments is important, but also so is resources to support those investments. And so that's the phrase that we've added, and that will be part of the work the staff does to try to work to identify those sources. So all in, these recommendations increase the amount devoted to equitable investments that will reduce disparities in the third ward to a total of $2,050,000 for the period of fiscal years 2019 through fiscal 21. And they also provide further guidance to the city manager and staff in the budget resolution regarding what expectations are beginning in FY 2020 and beyond. And so the document that I've handed out to you includes a chart that shows how those investments stack up. And you can see that they're heavy new investment in fiscal 19, a little lighter in fiscal 2020, and that's because we're uncertain about resources in the capital reserve fund. There's not a lot of flexibility there that year, and so and we haven't had a chance to do the work that will be included in the budget resolution. So I think you could see a change there in the recommendation that comes to you for fiscal 2020. And then in fiscal 2021, we have the Martin Luther King Lodge, and which is a major investment then. So those are the recommendations. Also attached to the budget are the fund statements that will help operationalize that. And so it doesn't show very clearly on the general fund statement, and if I get stuck here, Jeff can help me. But basically what we're showing you here is that we will accomplish this, and we will, the recommendations, and we will also accomplish the transfer to the budget stabilization fund to get that back to 10% of fund balance. And so, which I think is very prudent and I would recommend to do. And but the $200,000 extra that's coming from the general fund is included in the fiscal 19 budget. Then next is in your packet, I have transformation fund next. Is that what you have?
I have all of them in front of me, so
Okay.
I think all of us do.
Let's look at transformation fund. So you have to get out your microscope because it's small type. So over in the shaded column on the far right-hand side, you'll see the $750,000. That is the amount reserved for Third Ward Equitable Investment Initiative. Okay. So that's the reservation of funds. And then in the capital reserve fund, it shows the change in the fire station asset management. So in the prior version, where you see $50,000 there, that was $585,000 for acquisition. And as you go down the page, the amount for engineering department managed projects has gone up from 150 to 250,000, and that 50,000 goes out over the 5 years. So those are the changes that would be recommended to create the investments, the Third Ward investments, equitable investments that I'm recommending to you now. So with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, I'll start with Commissioner Allen, then Commissioner O'Connor.
So this is my last opportunity to speak on this. So I won't.
Well, no, you'll have next week.
Well, on this particular subject.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go really long, but there's a couple key points that I want to make. First of all, thank you, Eric, to you and your staff for getting creative, because you did have to get creative here, and I appreciate that.
Thanks.
And sometimes it kind of looks how I do my household budget from time to time. I guess I want to start by stating I have a key question before I go on. So in bullet item number 3, Eric, you have a quote, that language that would be added to the budget resolution. It says recommend ongoing equitable investments. Could you just help me and give me your definition of what equitable means? Does equitable mean the same amount of money spent across the 3 wards, or does it mean equity from a racial and a social economic standpoint?
It means the latter, not the former. So
Okay.
it would be about equitable investments to reduce disparities, not about equal investment.
Okay. Just a
And we could-
suggestion, you
yep.
might want to say equitable investments to reduce disparities in conjunction with, because
Okay.
people can get confused.
Yep. Good point.
It was suggested after Commissioner Lanier and I spoke on this issue at one of the previous meetings that we might not want to go down this path about talking about what's being spent in the third ward as opposed to the second ward as opposed to the third ward, because certain things cross wards, and it was mentioned about Garfield Park, which is a great example, as a matter of fact. Third ward uses that as well as well. So we're not talking about equity amongst the three wards, we're talking about equity from a social justice point of view. So with that context in mind, first, I'd like to state the obvious. The third ward doesn't butt up against downtown. It doesn't butt up against the river. So, second ward and first ward, and those that live in those central areas can benefit from, I'm not gonna say easy, but it's easier sometimes to allocate funds and find funds for these large sexy projects, if you will. River restoration's sexy, the street, some of the changes that we've made in underpasses to get from downtown business district to other business districts. That's cool stuff.
Right.
What's been proposed for the plaza here, eventually the city put money into that. That's sexy. So with that being said, I think what occurred to Commissioner Lanier and I if I'm not speaking for you, stop me, but in that session where we kind of is that it takes some level of intentionality when you start thinking about third ward. And so this is that kind of level of intentionality that I think is important. What I'd also like to contend is out of the proposed, and I don't oppose any of the proposed funding recommendations, but the two that I see that have the potential for the most impact, I want to emphasize. Number one is the capital support for Southtown SID. In Southtown, you have how many business districts?
Six with 5 are going through the ASP.
Yeah, so you have 6 business districts. Algernon Eastern's thriving with new businesses, but you have 5 that are struggling. And so providing capital support for the SID to help implement programs in those businesses, and I don't know what y'all are proposing, but it could be facade improvements, it could be minority business support. There's a lot of things that could be provided that could really make a difference, because then you're dealing with that equity. You're creating minority business owners who typically hire folks who live in the neighborhood, those kind of things. So that I think is exciting and something that I support. And the second one is the Third Ward Equitable Investment Initiative. But I would contend, or I would caution that, similar to my comment this morning about cure violence, is that I don't want to just throw money at a problem. I want to fund outcomes that are tangible. So what that money gets spent on, has to be put through a lens of, how does this create jobs? How does it create more opportunity? How does this level the playing field? Those kind of things. And I know it can only be spent on certain things, but I think you could get really creative with some of that in that space. So so this is a good start. It's certainly a far cry from where we were, but I think we have a far cry to go to get to where we have to go.
Yep.
So
Good. Thank you.
Well, and Commissioner, I'll add, I think you raise a very good point. I mean, there are other capital improvement projects that I think create an opportunity to support. I'm going to go back to neighborhoods of focus and not necessarily zip codes, because I know that crosses different wards and different zip codes. Being really intentional also is about being proactive and thinking about, as capital projects come online, how do we support workforce development, economic opportunity, and supporting minority and women-owned businesses, especially in our neighborhoods of focus. And I think some of the work that you all have been doing around fiscal and around our bid process and procurement and being really thoughtful about expanding our outreach is really key. And so we should be thinking about that with every single capital project that we support. So, Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah. So with the transfer out from capital reserve, that's going to reduce. We were going to hit our target of 10% this year, and then what's that going to leave the percentage as?
In our budget stabilization fund,
Yeah,
it'll be at 10%.
it'd still be 10%.
Yeah, because
okay.
we're taking the dollars.
Okay.
The only impact on the general fund was another $200,000 over 2 years. So we'll still make in the budget you adopt, we'll show the transfer that will still plus up the budget stabilization fund, the full 10%.
Good deal.
which will continue to have a positive impact on our bond rating. Jeff, you want to speak to that?
That's not quite true. We're gonna do a BA next week.
Oh, sorry.
For 750 and 18, to plus it up to 10%.
Sorry if you didn't hear me. We're going to do a BA next week, at the last meeting of the year, to take 750 from last year's surplus, and that'll put us at the 10% limit at the end of 19.
That's a more correct statement.
Thank you, Jeff.
That's what I thought was happening. I just wanted to make sure that it
Absolutely.
was still there.
One way or another, we're going to get
Yeah.
this.
Yes. That's an excellent point. Commissioners, other questions, comments? Commissioner?
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much for all of the time we've been spending the last couple weeks.
Yep. You're welcome.
And just kind of clearing schedules and late night conversations and all of that to get to this point. And I just agree with everything Commissioner Allen has said. We are grateful for what's before us. And to my colleagues, thank you all so much for the conversations that you've had with the administration to make sure that the administration was clear that you were supportive of something happening in light of the protests that we had back in December during that exercise. I like saying that protest piece. It makes it seem like it was just so
We agree with you.
17 guys.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, Eric, that I thought was critical throughout this process, definitely trying to get the funding, and there wasn't much, although I had a different opinion of those numbers, but we're at a place where I'm okay. I think that the piece that you were adamant about is making sure that we do not repeat this same mistake.
Exactly.
And that's the piece that means so much to us, and I'll speak again on Commissioner Allen's behalf, and if I'm wrong, he can correct me, but that was the piece I think that means the most to us, is that you recognize what we were struggling with, and although we didn't make any corrections from December until now, before we got to this point in the budget, that you were adamant about making sure that we do not repeat this again. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, you know, what measures we can put in place to make sure that we don't repeat this in the future. And I know that once we get through this budget cycle, we can spend more time on what that means and what it looks like. But the fact that you wanted to make sure that it was included means a lot. And so to you and your team, because I know although we were meeting with you directly, that somebody was working really hard in between those meetings, because he would come back with responses relatively quickly. So to all of you who have participated in this, thank you as well for your work.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a great team, and really appreciate their sticking with us as we went through this. So.
All right, Commissioner Khan?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the investment in MLK Lodge. That lodge has been around my whole life, and I think it's been underutilized my whole life. And the opportunities for family reunions, weddings, we're still waiting there. You know, putting a kitchen in there, childcare, whatever, you know, to really invigorate that community is tremendously exciting. So thank you for your work on this. And I think it also reflects well in the memorandum we got the week before, which we didn't have time to go over, some of the changes that we're going to see in the Parks Department, how they're reorganizing and really focusing on quality of life. So thank you for that, David.
Agreed.
All right.
All right. Should we move on?
Thank you very much. So, again, I want to thank you for a very good discussion during budget review. That's what budget review is about, is helping to make a better budget, and you have done that. So next, we had responses to city commission questions, and they are in your packet. And you've had the first batch you've had for some time. And I'm not exactly sure how you want to go through these. It could be, if you have any questions, about a particular memo, let's talk about them, or we could briefly highlight each memo. Which would you prefer?
Hopefully most of us, we don't have to go through each one. Hopefully all of us have had a chance to read the materials that we were given. I have a couple questions, and so maybe we can just
Sure. Would you
have
like to take the
commissioners
lead?
ask
Yeah.
questions. I don't feel the need to go through line by line or page by page.
Okay.
So I'll just open it up for questions. I'll start. So in response to the information you provided on track, So I just have a question on that. So help me understand why we don't just take the $85,000 allocation for, basically for interns. And why don't we just use it internally? And what's the value of having that go through GVSU when we have so many other colleges and universities in our community that we should be also working with, whether it's CC or Aquinas or Western so that was my question related to TRAT.
Yes, ma'am. So all valid questions, but right now they're moot. Grand Valley doesn't want or is not capable of proceeding with a new contract.
Huh.
So there's going to be a new. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Grand Valley's not interested in pursuing TRAT for a number of reasons. The environment following the Larry Nassar case is not a hospitable one for them to, to want to continue with this contract. They feel that they're at risk because they are the employee of record rather than the city. So they would be interested if the city was interested in being that employee of record, but if the city is not interested, then they don't want to proceed. So if that's an adequate answer.
So that opens up an opportunity to do just what you're saying, Mayor, which is to expand the program. And actually, to go back a little bit, TRAT was, I think, very valuable when we were going through our transformation. And if we continue, it still could be valuable. But what was really valuable is we got young talent in the organization. And that young talent has, we've seen persons who were former trade interns interviewing for positions and getting, being hired here. But it was really kind of our first foray into a formal internship program. Since then, Mary Beth has expanded that, and now we have interns to aid to, other full-time positions in the organization. So I think that we can use the dollars that have been allocated for this and still achieve the outcomes we want, which are having young talent in the organization and helping us get work done.
So, excuse me, ma'am. So, yes, so the agreement expires in July, the first of July. So, what I intend to do is to, as you say, we'll probably do a BA to shift those dollars, which I believe is $100,000 in the next fiscal year, and we'll shift that to temporary contracts. I'll have to come up with some type of arrangement, especially for the current TRAT students. But within the next couple of months, I hope to figure out a process where we can incorporate more schools, more universities, and reimagine the program. Potentially, what I would like to see is the TRAT interns are used throughout the city, more to the roots of what the project was, where you had interns doing specific projects to help us with our transformation. So whether that's working on equity or the continuous transformation, that's how we would use the TRAT interns in the future. So expect a BA to, if the budget is approved in the current form, expect a BA to transfer that money from what is contract services to temporary employees.
Well, and maybe Asante, you can bring back some options and models. I mean, I don't think it should be all that complicated. I think having a pot of money set aside to pay interns and departments who are interested in having an intern should be able to have access to those dollars. And it could be project specific, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's to, if I'm a department and I know that I have 3 upcoming retirements and I want to potentially have an intern to start to build a succession plan, or at least get people in the door, having access to that, I'm sure the department directors would be appreciative of. So I'm comfortable moving forward. I think there's real value in having interns throughout the organization for a whole host of reasons. And I'm pretty open to what that looks like. I just think we should open it up to students throughout our community and not just one university.
Yes.
So whatever that model is, or maybe you can bring forward to the commission a recommendation, or a couple options of what we might look at.
Yes.
I think we're pretty open to that.
Yeah, I do not want to lose sight, though, the fact that sometimes we want to call on them to do some research projects.
Absolutely.
So they're on this table.
Yeah, I think that's
That's what we'll
true. We do. And so maybe there could be some in the executive office, or maybe we should have an intern to help commissioners on projects they want to do and have someone in the executive office specifically assigned to support commissioners. So again, I think there's a lot of options, and I'm glad to hear that we're kind of rethinking what that looks like.
Yes, I should say that former Mayor Hartwell, I'm sure, would like to say that he's sad that the partnership is ending as it is. It had a great run for 12 years, and it helped the city get to a place that it needed to get to. But the Grand Valley currently isn't able to continue the contract as it was previously.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Other questions from the information that we have before us? So one of the items was related to Coldbrook, and one of the recommendations would be to move forward on just a portion of making a portion of that space available for fitness space. I'm pretty open to that. I think if our long-term intent is to use that space and that there's a need right now, it just makes sense. It's a beautiful space that's just basically sitting there vacant. So I'm open to having that conversation further. I don't think we necessarily have to decide it today, but thank you for the information.
Yep. So we can talk about it later. I think we'd be willing to do the preliminary study that says, here's what it would take to use it temporarily. And also, what would be foregone if we ended up using it differently in a redevelopment scenario? So, because we don't want to double invest or something like that. But,
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioners, other questions from the information? Go ahead, Commissioner.
The transit stops. I'm trying to find that.
Yeah,
Did I
it's
go
in
back too far?
it's in this one. It's on page starts on page 3.
Oh, I went back.
Transit stop
Yeah.
improvement.
No, I'm trying to remember, Eric. Give me a minute. You keep.
And it
Okay.
is broken down by ward and first phase and.
I have a couple questions about it.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
Or just something that I was excited to see, that we're talking about including snow removal and trash pickup. That's
Yes.
huge, because we've been
Right.
talking
Yeah.
about trying to figure, yeah.
Commissioner O'Connor, you want to weigh in on that?
I was just wondering if we can get a bus up to Leonard too.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
I think I can get you a stop. I'm not sure I can get you a bus.
That only took 2 years though.
You should come to our rapid CEO interviews next week, Wednesday.
There you go.
I wrote it down. I don't know what my schedule is like, but I am curious. I know we had talked about with the shelter. I'm sorry. Did someone else have the floor?
No.
Oh.
No, we're getting a little punchy at this late hour, so go ahead.
Yeah.
We had talked about with the shelters, the possibility of looking into solar panels
Yep.
so that we could have heat and electricity, and then the electricity that would have the
Charging stations.
USB outlets and all of that, and or just make them regular outlets so that any device, especially as technology changes, it could be anything, but the outlet seems to remain. Where are we with that? I know you're going to do some checking to see if that was going to be a part of it. Are we any further on that?
I think that's part of the evaluation. I don't know that anybody's here that has specific information, so I will get you a separate email on that. But I think we're still looking, last I knew, let's put it that way, we were still including solar panels or electrification of some and the USB ports. But remember that we did the study, the survey, and that was one of the things that people were excited about. So.
And the Rapid has been talking about that as well, along with they just went through a process to do an analysis and get feedback from the community. And so Josh and the mobility department is working in partnership with the Rapid.
Okay, because that was what slowed it down, because there's something in this fiscal wasn't there? For this?
Yes.
And we haven't been able to spend it because of, they needed to go through
We
a couple more.
wanted to make sure that
studies.
we worked through the Align process and got better information and did engagement, and so that slowed us down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting ready to go.
Well, and speaking of that, commissioners, we should schedule an update to the full commission on the outcomes of the Align study. Because there's quite a bit of feedback about the city, including some of the routes along Eastern and high usage areas.
That would be great.
So I'll maybe Eric, if you want to follow up with Peter,
Yep.
and see if we can get that scheduled. They just did a really nice update with the full board. I don't know, not even at one of our recent. We have a lot of meetings at one of our recent meetings.
That would be great, because I know with the ridership, I think we know based on what we're seeing or hearing, but it would be good to see the data behind
Yeah.
where things are, and have that to overlap the map so that we can see, okay, if this is what's being said, then this is where the investment will go. And it's 500,000, 250 from us, 250 from them, and then the portion
we're
that
doing-
DDA is contributing is specific to downtown.
Right,
correct?
I think DDA is doing 500,000, we're doing 250 for 2 years,
Mhm.
and they're doing 250 for 2 years,
And since we didn't spend it in FY18,
carries forward.
and then, so we'll have 19 and 20, 250 in those 2 years? Okay.
We're all, depends on how fast we can get the shelters done, we could spend it all in 1 year, so.
Okay.
Because now we're in the second year of the authorization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor Bliss, when you had the presentation at the ITP board, how long was that presentation? Do you remember?
Well, they did some questions to us, and we did some interactive things with the full board. So we probably shouldn't base it off of what they did with the board.
Okay.
Because we were doing some other exercises too as part of a 3-hour planning process.
That we don't want that.
And that was a portion of it. So I would ask.
Okay, so I was just trying
I'd
to decide whether we could get it at a regular committee of the whole meeting, where we don't have 20 items, or a,
I would do it
Special
at least a
briefing?
30-minute briefing after count, yeah.
all right. Thank you.
Just make sure we get those landing pads in Second Ward. I see that we are behind.
All right, commissioners, other questions, feedback?
Are we at the finalized all outstanding items, or are we still in the responses?
Still in responses?
Okay.
Yeah, any other questions about the responses?
I just really appreciated the detail that we got about the Parks Village in the back. I
Mhm.
knew
Yeah,
that's
that
a
was
question that
helpful.
you often bring up,
Yeah.
and it was really broken down well and clearly, so thank you for that. Especially as we are, I don't know how close we are to the next one coming up. 3 years? 2
No,
years?
it'll be on the ballot next year.
Okay, so I think this is
I
good to know.
know.
Very impressive
Crazy.
how much we've leveraged. It's incredible,
Yep.
I know.
50%.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, other questions? All right, so that will take us to outstanding items.
Okay, I don't have any outstanding items. I think
So-
we're there, except the one thing we do have is, so we have the discussion about police and community relations, community and police relations that we'll do in, as soon as we can get it scheduled, Mayor, in June. But we have the dollars allocated, and it'll be there when we need to use them. And one of the topics we probably ought to talk about at that time is, do we carry forward the dollars from, the unspent dollars from this year into the next fiscal year? That's something we could deal with in the next fiscal year, but that's a question that we're wrestling with.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. And I don't know if you saw some of the recent grants that are coming out of Department of Justice.
I have not,
We
but I'm
should,
sure Chief is, but I'll check.
yeah,
to
we
make sure.
should look, I think there will be some opportunities to apply for some additional grants as well for
Good.
community policing and prevention efforts. So it might be nice to get information.
really
I'd like to, and I'll work on this today, get some potential dates out there for, I think we should spend 3 hours, or at least allocate 3 hours for a public safety work session, because I would like for it to include a number of items, and then you can add items that you want to see as a part of that. And then 90 minutes for the infrastructure and streetlights. And so we'll work on getting those scheduled so that we can move forward on those 2 items. I feel like those 2 are outstanding that we need to make some decisions on and move forward.
So tomorrow we'll be able to go to the report out.
Yes,
in the
tomorrow
21st
night.
century. And then might there be an opportunity to send you or Eric or both some suggestions of what we want on the agenda for that
Yeah.
meeting about public safety.
Yeah, please do. We'll try to get something out today to at least get something scheduled, at least tentatively. And then I am hopeful that we'll have additional feedback tomorrow night and then some follow-up after that, similar to what we did after our last session. And that can be incorporated into our work session.
Okay.
So I think
But
that's.
I guess one more thing about the work session is that I heard some discussion today among commissioners about wanting to have swim lanes essentially. You know, here's so much for officers, here's so much for things, here's so much. And so if you're looking for a recommendation, let me know. Otherwise, we'll just have a discussion. So I don't know that we're ready to make that kind of allocation, but I did hear you talking about that.
Yeah, I think that should be what we decide in the work session. I think we should have that conversation,
Hold off on
have the
that.
information, and then we can set some direction.
All right,
Can you
sounds
repeat that
good.
again and do this movement? I wasn't sure.
Well, pretty soon I'll be doing
It's
this.
a dance.
I do have a outstanding item. I know Eric, we had a conversation at Civil Service regarding your recommendation to increase the size of the executive office by how many employees? 10
Two.
total? Well,
Well,
no,
two.
because you're moving other people from other departments
Sure.
into the executive office. So what's the entire amount?
I don't know exactly without going back and looking. It's probably 8 to 10
Yeah, so.
for communications purposes.
Right.
Right.
So I wanted to, that's still outstanding for me. I think, I've expressed my concern, just based on the multiple conversations we've had about executive level decisions, which, the budget of the executive office is definitely an executive level decision, and when those decisions should be made and at what point, considering we're in the process of hiring our next CEO. So I think what I've said to you is it would be great if we didn't have a budget that included that movement and to, allow the next CEO to make the decision about what the communications office should look like, and taking the recommendations from the firm that we hired and determining, at what level they would want to implement those recommendations. I think we have all prioritized communication since before I was sworn in, and I know it was before then too. But I also recognize, so it's a priority, and
Huge priority.
yeah, and so I'm not trying to take away from it being a priority as much as I am recognizing that right now we're in a state where we will have a new CEO relatively quickly. And so it would be, I think that's a decision for that person to make about how to implement those policies, as opposed to trying to make this movement, and then if there are elements of it that they may not necessarily agree with, trying to undo that later.
So a suggestion might be then to hold that amount and wait until September. At least to have we've got so many conversations that
Yeah.
we're trying to schedule now, but to put a place marker there and then wait to fill it out. And I don't know, you're in civil service, what role that board might be playing?
Well, so two things. In general, there isn't an amount to hold because people are already in positions in different departments. So that holds itself in that
structural.
way, yeah. So, but then there were the two positions that were new positions, and those positions will need to go through the civil service process because I think they both are newly created positions, or is it just the one that's a new position?
Yes, Commissioner, there are two new positions. One is using an existing classification graphic illustrator, and the other one is the digital media manager position that would need civil service approval. So if I could explain my intent for why this recommendation is in the budget is if I were the incoming CEO, I would want as little initial friction as possible. I would like to have structures in place where I could act and make things work. So, and it's not, there's always a honeymoon period, but, with a new person. But do you want to, if I'm the person, do I want to use that person do I want to use that time to, for this, or are there bigger things that we need to do? So, my intent was to be, I guess, honor the Commission's prioritization of communications as number one, and I've been listening to the discussions that we've been having for years too, and to put it in place, and to have a structure set up that could be changed later. What we could do is, we're making progress now with the structure we have in place. We could, and we have, so for example, one of the communications persons that would move in the executive office is an engagement person. Well, that person is Layla Eslani, who is also primary on the Southtown SID, right? So we need to get that done, and I don't want to detract from that operation. So perhaps we could leave the structure but not make the changes and move people, for example, until we're sure. So that way there's a structure in place, the money is allocated, the new person can do whatever they want to do with that, and we could leave the current actors kind of in place where they are. So that's another approach.
So when you say that, do you mean physically moving or not moving, or are you saying within the budget, physically moving those classifications into the budget for the executive office?
In this budget, they are in that.
Correct.
They're already in the executive office. So
Right.
there would be, I don't know exactly how much unwinding to do to move them back to where they were in fiscal 18. So, which I don't recommend we do, given if you want to see a budget staff shrivel and die, that'd be a problem. So, so I guess what I'm saying is move forward with it as it is in the budget, but I will pledge to you I'm not going to move anybody until, I won't move anybody. So we'll leave them where they are, comfortably working as they're working, and we'll take care of that later.
So perhaps I haven't been clear. So the physical movement is the least of my concerns. The movement of the line items within the budget is where my concerns lie.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I get what you're saying, to make this decision now to place people back where they were in this current budget that we're in would take a lot of effort and work, but this isn't a new request. So, we talked about this probably at one of the first, probably the first budget meeting, and you and I have talked about it since that meeting probably 3 or 4 times. So if you've chosen to wait until the week before the approval of the budget to make the decision, I don't want that to be interpreted as it's Commissioner Lanier's request and it's coming untimely and it's going to put people in a position where they have to do some unraveling and they may not be happy. I'm not owning that, because I've made these comments
you absolutely
for
have.
quite some time.
Well, let's find out where the other commissioners are on
That's
this.
a good question.
So let's figure out where the mind of the commission and the consensus is on this issue, because I do feel like we have talked about it. Unfortunately, Commissioner Jones isn't here today. I know he's been actively engaged in this as well. So I'll open it up for other input on this and direction. So, commissioners, anyone wish to weigh in on this? Commissioner Rapar, you look very confused. That's just my nonverbal reading.
Yeah. I mean,
Commissioner?
I'll weigh in. I mean, I guess I share some of Commissioner Lear's sentiment about wanting to, depending on who that next person is, build their own team. I get that. I do know that at least that social media person, whether or not that's an in-house position, I'm still not convinced it has to be an in-house position too, just given the changing landscape of how you deal with social media, that it's kind of an evolving thing, and whether that's something that should be contracted out or not too. I'm still kind of weighing that. I know that that's an important thing for the organization. I just don't know if it necessarily needs to live in or out of the organization. So I'd like to explore that further.
Okay. Other commissioners want to weigh in on this? Commissioner Allen?
I was just trying to give everybody else a chance to go. not to give anything away, but at the next fiscal meeting next week, we have to approve a budget amendment because we've overspent in the executive office to the tune of over $200,000. So I'm trying to work through that memo and see what that looks like. And some of that was related to changes made related to communication. So I'm a little bit reticent right now to make those changes permanent within a budget, which sounds like that's what we're doing.
So you're thinking, hold it as it was.
Till after.
I don't want to make those changes permanent,
Until we have a new city manager?
yes.
Okay. Others wish to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's where, when we got the presentation from Truscott Rossman, I thought that we were planning to wait. We got the structure in place, but then we were gonna let them build that team and lay it out how they wanted. That's what I recall, at least our discussion up here.
Okay. Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, and to.
I certainly do appreciate the idea of taking one thing off of their initial to-do list.
Right.
I certainly can appreciate that, but.
Okay.
But you really aren't taking it off the to-do list because the Truscott Russman lays out the plan. So they could choose to implement that as it is, I mean.
Yeah, and
Go
whether
ahead.
it's on the to-do list or not, I think maybe it depends on the personality of whomever we choose. But I would think that they will find out immediately that communication was our top priority and want to be very careful about how that is set up then. So I'm more comfortable holding off.
So it sounds like that is the consensus. So we
That's what I
will
was waiting for. Thank
hold
you.
off and put it back as is, those positions, and not move them to the executive office at this time. And we'll wait until we have a new city manager to do that.
Because I want to clarify though, but we're still operating this new communication plan, so.
Right. It's
Okay.
related to these two positions.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Social media and the engagement one. Okay. All right. Okay, and then the only other, this isn't necessarily outstanding, but I want to make sure that it stays a priority. I know we were just given a presentation from Suzanne Schultz on the enforcement piece, and I don't want that to fall off the radar. I think everyone around this table, we've talked about the urgency of that, and we've heard it really loud and clear from the community. And so I'd like to see, I know Suzanne indicated that she thought with some restructuring of current resources, we could come up with a plan. I'd like to see that plan sooner rather than later.
I've
so
asked
that-
them to work on an A3.
Okay,
So-
okay. I want to make sure that's a priority.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up. That was something I'm just trying to figure out when to talk about this, and maybe now, and I
All
think
the time.
I was gonna bring it up again tonight when we have the alcohol discussion, but as part of that A3, I'd like some analysis to be done around adding if we look at changing the ordinance to be a SEPTED ordinance, potentially adding another officer in the code enforcement division, who could sort of act as a potential community police officer, but for businesses. And for those kind of known bad actors, the people that we're gonna have to be in constant communication with, as somebody who then can be sort of that liaison to not only help them address their issue and rectify it to be up to whatever our code ends up being, but also, I mean, we know that often those are some of the bad actors, and so to kind of have a more forward-facing uniform presence in those places, doing some of that proactive policing. And so I think that also relates to
It's a
some of
great idea.
the alcohol policy we're gonna talk about tonight in terms of, helping those people plan for success as well, so.
And it could be someone who is trained in that environmental crime prevention as well as doing some of the enforcement. And
Right.
I think all of us have experienced that in all 3 wards. And so I think that's a great idea. Jeff, I see you moving forward. Is there something you want to add?
I just want to get some clarification on the communications piece for my budget staff so they can figure out exactly what to do here. So we're not moving the positions, is that correct? So those will get reprojected. I think that's all within the general fund, so it'll move from exec to, I believe, the planning.
Back to planning.
Wherever
Back
they
to
were.
planning.
So there were two engaged, 2 full-time and 2 temporaries that were in planning that went to exec. They'll go back.
Okay, so I don't think that'll change the general fund budget in total, but we'll redo that. What about the 2 new positions? Are we still projecting those, or are we removing those from this budget? That's what I wasn't clear on, I guess, too.
I think
I think we hold.
Yeah.
What we're saying is we hold and we don't move forward on that piece until we have a new city manager.
So that means that when you want to do something, you have to amend the budget to put them back in the budget.
That's true.
So
Right, that's
So
okay.
this just holds the dollars and it keeps them, out of fund balance and things like that. If we keep them in there, we obviously don't have to fill them, but.
I think what I heard is that they want to eliminate the two new positions. The commission would like to eliminate the two new positions.
And then once, then just amend the budget in the event that there's interest in filling those 2 new positions.
Is that where commissioners are, or do we just want to hold it as a placeholder
That's what I understood.
for the new city manager?
I'm interested. I'm open to them holding the money for them to spend how they want on communications to implement the plan.
And not allocated for specific
Yeah.
positions that were in
Yeah,
that
correct.
Yeah.
recommendation.
That works
Right,
for me.
exactly.
I'm supportive of that. Like, let's
That's what
hold
I'm
it
talking
in the
about.
budget as a
But not for those
placeholder.
positions.
A communications line item related to those 2
Yes.
positions, but not.
But not those
speci-
positions titled.
Whatever that amount is, that's
So
held.
before we moved that money to contingent and increased contingent, so we had it available, and then if the positions were added, we moved it then, would that be
Yes.
That's
an
perfect.
acceptable solution
Yep,
for those 2 positions?
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll
What-
delete those, move the dollar of their total amount to contingent.
Contingent.
Yeah.
Whatever you recommend is
Okay.
easiest, and
Makes the most
we-
sense.
I trust you to
Okay.
figure it out.
All right.
I think for me, what I'm hearing the consensus is we want to have the availability of the next city manager to decide how to use those dollars
Okay.
to meet the needs of having a robust communication plan,
Okay.
proactive and reactive.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All
great
right.
question, Jeff.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any final thoughts, commissioners? I think this was a really good discussion, and we have plenty of time. Those of you going over to the groundbreaking, I will plan to see you there. And then reminder, we have some of us have meetings this afternoon with 21st Century. Hopefully, all of you were able to get that on your schedule. We talked about that last time, having the opportunity for commissioners to meet with them and ask questions. And then
Just a reminder, there's not a 4 o'clock election security. Our office will put out a memo to you, and if you have questions, call me.
Okay.
Will that work?
Yes.
Okay.
And then commissioners, tonight is commission night out, Harrison Park. City staff will be there early, similar to what we've done in the past with like an open house. And then the meeting will start at 7 p.m.
Great.
On Grand Rapids' beautiful west side.
On the beautiful west side of Grand Rapids.
There is construction there too, right?
And there is
So,
construction,
no,
so leave
but
ample
just-
time.
So just do what you normally do when you see construction.
That's right, don't.
Take a side street.
Call 311.
All right, okay, see you all shortly at the park.
All right, you were gonna come back.